As we said last week, Second Corinthians is a very emotional letter in which Paul is both opening his heart to those that he loves very dearly and sharply rebuking and challenging those who are standing in opposition to him. And so, as we move through the letter, we see both of those things and more in this week's New Testament reading. Okay, chapter 7 of 2 Corinthians that we begin with is this picture of reconciliation that we see in the book, where we know from the first letter, and seems like other instances as well, that Paul has been very hard on this church. And so in chapter 7 he says, I commend you for your response, that you've had a godly sorrow. There's lots to be learned from this chapter about how we respond to sin, how we respond to rebuke. And there is a sorrow that is good for us because it makes us better. There is a bad sorrow that causes us to despair and leads us to somewhere bad, but there is godly sorrow that leads to repentance, and Paul is praising the Corinthians for that type of response. Then in chapters 8 and 9, there's a little bit of a diversion, it seems, when Paul begins reminding the church in Corinth about their commitment to give a financial gift to the needy brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. We read about that in the book of Acts. We read about that in several of Paul's letters. In 1 Corinthians, he mentioned that they should be collecting for those needy saints. And here in 2 Corinthians, he uses several different techniques to try to motivate them to follow through on their commitment. He talks about the example of the Macedonians giving out of their poverty. He talks about how generosity is really an essence of the gospel, because Jesus, though he was rich, became poor that we might become rich in him. He talks about the biblical principles of helping those who are in need so that we would be helped when we are in need, and that those who sow bountifully will reap bountifully. But the point is, you have committed to this gift, and so don't let me down. Don't come up short on this and bring shame upon yourselves, but follow through with your commitment to give of your means to help those who need it. Then in chapter 10 going forward, Paul is engaging in this challenge that we've been waiting for, knowing from the beginning of the book that there are those in Corinth who challenge his authority and are trying to dismiss him. And so Paul gears up for this, saying that we have to destroy speculations and lofty things, not according to the flesh, but there is a warfare in which we take on arguments of those that are false. And so he talks about these false teachers, those that are clearly influenced by the things of the world and trying to influence the Corinthians in that way. They're focused on things of the flesh, saying that Paul is not eloquent, that he's not powerful in speech. They, of course, on the other hand, they are eloquent and educated and rich and powerful, and so they hold this sway. But Paul says really they are deceptive. They are creeping in to take advantage of these Christians. And so Paul goes head to head with these people, these challengers, and you might think, well, how is he going to do that? Maybe he will show how impressive his resume is up against these quote-unquote super apostles or these false teachers, and show how he really outweighs them in all of these categories. But really, Paul does just the opposite. Paul, as we see in chapter 11, goes through and says, yeah, I could show all of my impressive stats against them, but instead he goes through and says, really, all I have to show for myself is my own weakness. And he goes through his list of tribulations and sorrows and sufferings for the sake of Christ. And so it does a couple things. It does remind the readers of this letter that Paul has given himself heart and soul to the cause of the gospel. And so anybody who would try to cast doubt on his worth, his value, or his work as an apostle, that's just absurd, because Paul has given everything for the cause. But it also reminds the readers of what this is really about. This is not about wealth and influence and status and education and eloquence. It's about being like Jesus and following in the footsteps of his sufferings. And so Paul all along is, with a little bit of a sarcastic tone, saying, I can't hold a candle to these great men, but all I can do is just show the ways that I have humbly and meekly served Christ. And that should be a profound lesson for those in Corinth, both those that are loyal to Paul as well as those who are in opposition to him. But we'll see how the book rounds out next week, and so check back in for the next video. But I thank you for watching.